Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Today we're going to continue talking about love and tragedy in the Victorian era. Our featured novel is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Last time we summarized the book for you. Sounds kind of sad. But if you can put up with the sadness of that book, or if you like that sort of thing, read it anyway, and you might actually enjoy Thomas Hardy's style. I know I enjoyed his style when I read Jude the Obscure. That's the only Hardy novel I've ever read. But hey, maybe I would enjoy reading this as well. It's probably available online somewhere for free. It's probably in the public domain because it is so old. What does it have to be? Older than 50 years or something like that to be in the public domain. So you might find a copy of it yourself and read it on your device.
Yeah, but even if you go to a bookstore, there's a section of just classical, English literature. Those books are really cheap. They're reprints, and it's kind of nice to have a book you can carry around with you. I think it's actually very easy to read. I don't think it's too hard. I think our listeners would really enjoy it. It is sad, but I think it's fascinating to learn about life back in history. And for the girls who read it, guys, you can see how hard life was for women back then. They had no freedom, and they either got married or they had nothing, because you couldn't just go and get educated and get a job. Only the guys could go to university or college. So things have changed a lot, so it'll make you appreciate life today. Right now, guys, as we always do, we're going to read through day 2, which is all about our author Thomas Hardy, and then we'll be back to discuss some of these terms.
Author Thomas Hardy was born in England in 1840. Although his father was a blue-collar worker, he picked up the habit of reading from his mother. He initially wanted to attend college and become a minister, but his family couldn't afford his tuition. Therefore, at age 16, Hardy began an apprenticeship and prepared for a career as an architect, writing in his spare time. His first novel was turned down by several publishers. However, Hardy took a friend's advice and changed his style. It worked, and his second novel, Desperate Remedies, was published in 1871. Although the novel wasn't a massive success, it gave Hardy the confidence he needed to switch careers. His next novel, A Pair of Blue Eyes, gained Hardy more exposure and helped win him new fans across England. He wrote several more novels in the 1870s and 1880s, many set in the west of England, which he called Wessex. Hardy's most influential works were 2 Wessex novels, Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure. Although Hardy wrote during the uptight Victorian era, his books dealt with immoral themes including sex before marriage, having children outside of marriage, and cold-blooded murders. In fact, there were so many disapproving reactions to these works that Hardy switched to writing poetry to avoid the negative reviews. In his final years, Hardy wrote abundantly, publishing over 900 poems on a variety of topics. When he died in 1928, Hardy was buried at Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner alongside some of England's greatest writers. However, he requested that his heart be buried closer to home, beside the graves of his wife and ancestors.
Okay, guys, we're talking about author Thomas Hardy. He was born in England in 1840. It says his father was a blue-collar worker. A blue-collar refers to people who work for a living with their hands, their bodies. They use their muscles. If you're a white-collar worker, you work in an office, you probably have a tie. You probably have to dress up in business clothes. Blue-collar workers would include the men we see working on the streets, who are fixing the roads, people who are working in construction, maybe building buildings or houses, homes. Those are blue-collar workers. So kind of referred to the color of your shirt. I think long ago, the workers who would work outside, they did have, those blue, like denim sort of shirts that they'd wear. White collar, of course, again refers to an office worker. So his father, even though he was a blue-collar worker, he picked up the habit of reading from his mom. His mother was a big reader. And like all of us, some of us take after our father, or some of us take after our mothers a little more, depending on what we're interested in. My mom loved to read, and so as a young girl, I read all the time, just because I wanted to be like my mom.
Okay, so maybe his dad was out working all the time, so he spent a lot of time with his mother at home.
Maybe, yeah.
And she did a lot of reading, and he picked up the habit from her. Well, mom's doing it. I enjoy doing it too. He initially wanted to attend college, or you could say to attend university, and become a minister, but his family couldn't afford his tuition. So initially, at the beginning... At first, that's what he wanted to do. I want to go to college and study to become a minister, which means a minister in a church. You want to be a priest or a reverend or something like that. But unfortunately, his father could not afford the tuition. Of course, the tuition is the money you pay to go to college.
Yeah, to take courses, you have to pay tuition. So, therefore, at age 16, Hardy began an apprenticeship and prepared for a career as an architect, writing in his spare time. Now, nowadays, most kids, if they need to, they have the opportunity of getting into a college and then doing an internship, where you go and work for a company in your field. Maybe you're studying advertising, and so you take an internship with an advertising agency, and you learn more about what a job is going to be like for you after you graduate. But back then, you really either had to be very wealthy or royal to get into any sort of university or college. And so his family didn't quite have the money. So another track or option for a career would be go to work side by side with someone. Maybe he was a blacksmith. He worked with iron and made horseshoes for horses back then. You would go and work every day, long hours, right by the side of someone who owned his business. And that would give you a potential career as you got older. So that's what he did. And he prepared for a career as an architect. An architect is someone who designs buildings, what they look like on the outside. They draw something that we refer to as what's it called? Blueprints.
Blueprints?
Blueprints, yeah. They're called blueprints, and they have the design of the building. And so from that, a contractor, someone who is in charge of building and construction, can look at that blueprint and know how he needs to proceed, how big something should be, how small something should be. So an architect's also responsible for making sure everything is built correctly. But the big portion of their job is to design and draw up those blueprint plans.
That's the person who designs and draws up those blueprint plans. An architect, the science is called architecture. Architecture. You might want to study architecture at, Cooper Union in New York City or something. I guess it's the best place to do that. But in any case here, he's going to become an architect. I guess he learned something. He later designed his own house, which was built by his brother as well. So again here, he was preparing for that career, but he still wanted to be a writer. That's what he wanted to do at heart. So maybe he had time to work on his writing. He did that in his spare time. Spare just means extra or left over. So maybe after a hard day's work, when he got home and after he had dinner, he decided to go into the study and practice writing. Maybe writing in his diary, or maybe writing a short story or whatever.
We also use spare when we talk about something that's extra. For example, most of us who own cars have a spare tire in the back in case we get a flat tire one day and we're out on the road. Then we can go into our trunk and pull out that spare tire and replace it for the one that's flat. So his first novel was turned down by several publishers. Hey, join the club, buddy. Join the club just means, it's happened to a lot of other people. You're just one of many. When people start writing, they're usually not accepted the first time they submit their manuscript to a publisher. He was turned down. If someone turns you down or you're turned down, it means they reject your proposal. Could be that you like someone, you've been dating someone and you propose marriage and she turns you down, you were turned down. Or some of us go to job interviews and we're hoping we'll get the job, but we're turned down. Or if you're an actor or a singer, you go audition for a show and you're turned down. They don't want you. It's a tough thing we have to put up with in life.
Oh, such a tragic memory I remember back in high school at the high school dance. I asked Delightful Dawn for a dance, and she turned me down. She looked at me, and she kind of frowned, and she said, "Get lost, creep." So, of course, I was devastated by that. But in any case, in this particular case, his first novel was turned down. They said, "No, sorry. We appreciate your effort. Thank you. Don't call us, we'll call you," etc. However, Hardy took a friend's advice and changed his style. So his friend said, I don't think you got published because your style isn't good enough, or maybe they don't like this particular style. Maybe it's too hard for most people. Maybe you should change it. So Thomas Hardy took his friend's advice. He listened to his friend and changed that style, and it worked. It was successful, and his second novel, Desperate Remedies, was published way back in the year 1871. Of course, if something's published as a novel or a magazine, it's printed and becomes available to the public for sale.
Right. So moving on to the next paragraph, although the novel wasn't a massive or huge success, it gave Hardy the confidence he needed to switch careers. So it wasn't a really big success. It probably wasn't on the bestsellers list. There wasn't one back then, but I'm kidding. So massive just means really, really big. It gave Hardy, though, the confidence he needed. If you have confidence, you believe in yourself. You could also say here it gave Hardy the self-confidence. They're both correct. So confidence is that the belief in yourself, the faith that you can do something, that you have some sort of ability or talent that is worth, showing other people. So it gave him a lot of confidence, and that's when he was able to switch careers. A switch is to change from one thing to another. Remember, he had apprenticed as an architect, so he switched from being an architect to a full-time writer. It gave him a lot of confidence. Good for him.
Okay, so he switched careers there and he could become a writer full-time. Okay, that brings us to the halfway point in today's lesson. Let's take a time out right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是哈利。今天我们要阅读的文章是 Unit 14文学单元的第二天课程。在今天的文章中，我们将会阅读到黛丝姑娘的作者 Thomas Hardy 的生平。文章的第一段提到 Hardy 出生于1840年的英国。我们看到第一段的第二句 Although his father was a blue-collar worker, he picked up the habit of reading from his mother. 尽管他的父亲是一个蓝领工人，但他从母亲身上学到阅读的习惯。片语 pick up 在本句是指 start a habit or learn a new skill， 也就是开始养成某种习惯或学习某种新技能的意思。例如 Paul picked up a few French phrases when he was traveling in France. 保罗在法国旅行的时候学会了几句法语。Pick up 也有收拾、整理的意思。例如 Kevin asked his children to pick their toys up before they had dinner. 凯文要求他的孩子们在吃晚餐前收拾他们的玩具。另外 picked up 还有用车接某人的意思。例如 When you arrive, give me a call and I'll pick you up. 当你抵达时，打电话给我，我会去接你。我们接着看第一段的第四句。Therefore, at age 16, Hardy began an apprenticeship and prepared for a career as an architect, writing in his spare time. 因此，在16岁时，哈代开始拜师学艺，为建筑师的职业做准备。在他空闲时，则写作。名词 apprenticeship 是学徒身份、学徒时期的意思。Serve an apprenticeship 就是指当学徒。例如 Peter served an apprenticeship as an architect when he was 18. 彼得在18岁时当建筑师学徒。Apprenticeship 如果去掉 ship 的话，也是名词，学徒的意思。Apprentice 也可以当动词，当学徒的意思。Be apprenticed to somebody 就是指当某人的学徒。 例如 Judy was apprenticed to a famous fashion designer. 朱棣是一位知名时尚设计师的学徒。我们接着看这一句有一个形容词 spare， 意思是空闲的。这个字也可以指替换用的、备用的。例如 The front left tire of my car was flat, but I didn't have a spare one. 我车子的左前轮爆胎了，但是我没有备胎。另外 spare 也可以当动词用，有腾出时间、饶恕、使什么免于什么的意思。例如 Can you spare a few minutes? I have something important to tell you. 你可以抽空几分钟吗？我有重要的事要告诉你。The soldiers were grateful to their enemies for sparing their lives. 这些士兵感激敌人饶过他们的性命。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We shall now continue with today's lesson. We're actually talking about the author of our featured novel, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And, of course, Thomas Hardy was born in England. His father was a blue-collar worker, but his mother gave him the idea to read a lot. He wanted to go to college, but they couldn't afford the tuition, so he became an apprentice to an architect, and he would write in his spare time. He eventually got a novel published, and therefore he switched careers. He could now work he could work full-time as a writer and focus on publishing more novels. Okay, so let's go on and talk about what happened here. His next novel, A Pair of Blue Eyes, gained Hardy more exposure and helped him win new fans across England. So remember, his first novel was published, Desperate Remedies, in 1871, and then later his next novel was A Pair of Blue Eyes, and he got more exposure. So maybe the first novel wasn't so popular, but this one was more popular. And if you have exposure, that means more and more people know about you, especially if you're trying to become famous as a musician or as a writer or as an artist. You want more exposure. You want more and more people to know about what you do.
Well, it helps, doesn't it? Well, that helped him win new fans across England. He wrote several more novels in the 1870s and 80s, many set in the west of England. If a novel is set somewhere, that just means where that's the particular location that the author has chosen to use as a backdrop or a background. And that place was called Wessex. I don't know that particular area myself.
Well, it was actually made up by Hardy. That was his fictional area of England, like the south central part of England or southwest part of England.
No wonder I've never heard of it. Okay, so that's something that authors do sometimes, especially if they write critically of an area. They don't want to use a city because the people who live in that city will be angry. How dare you talk about our city like that? So sometimes they make up places that seem very similar to places that really do exist. Hardy's most influential works were two Wessex novels, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which we've been talking about, and Jude the Obscure. Obscure means not well known. I'm not sure what that book's about. Tom, you read it, so...
Yeah, I'm not going to summarize it now. It's too complicated. But I should say it's also tragic, like our featured novel. Yeah, people die. People, have terrible lives.
Things like that happened back then.
Destroyed dreams, things like that.
Influential just means having a lot of influence or being able to persuade someone about something. So these were influential works, these two books, one of which we're focusing more on, and we'll focus more on tomorrow or in our next program when we talk about the themes of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. So why don't you take it from there?
I will indeed. So here the next sentence says, although Hardy wrote during the uptight Victorian era, his books dealt with immoral themes including all sorts of immoral themes such as sex before marriage, having children outside of marriage, and also cold-blooded murders, killing people
Yikes.
in cold blood without having any remorse at all. Now, we're describing the Victorian era as being uptight. Uptight is a word we use to describe people who are excessively conservative. You can't have any ideas outside of what's been done for years and years. In the Victorian era, things were pretty proper. You had to behave a certain way. And certainly, sex before marriage, children outside of marriage, those were very taboo subjects, things you could not discuss because people would go, "Oh, how could you talk about that? That is so improper."
Yeah, Queen Victoria was very moral. And so the time around her reign as Queen of England produced a really highly moral society, you could say. Yeah, and they didn't talk about those things. And for sure, if those things happened, you were looked down upon by the rest of society. So, in fact, it says there were so many disapproving reactions to these works that Hardy switched to writing poetry to avoid the negative reviews. He, like many artists, can't take the criticism. It's very hard to be criticized when you put your heart and soul into something that you've produced as an artist. So it was hard for him that there were a lot of negative reviews, negative reactions. They disapproved of the themes in his books. Oh, you shouldn't be writing about that stuff. But in reality, those things were happening in real life, you know, with people. That's just the way human beings act. So in his final years, Hardy wrote abundantly, publishing, look at this, over 900 poems on a variety of topics. Yeah, I was just reading about his marriages. He had 2 wives, Emma, who lived till she was 72, and then his second wife had been one of his assistants while his first wife was still around. And it sounds like he really never got into the second wife. Her name was Florence. She wrote his biography, but he actually wrote it, but she put her name on it, which is kind of interesting. So those poems were what he focused on towards the latter part of his life.
I think he had been writing poetry all along, but he just decided to focus more on his poetry when the criticism just got too much for him.
It broke his heart.
Yeah, I guess he was ahead of his time, we could say, because those subjects are discussed quite openly nowadays. But back then, they were very taboo, which means something you shouldn't really do in public. You shouldn't discuss it. It could bring about bad vibrations from people. So yes, he wrote abundantly. He wrote a lot of stuff, publishing over 900 poems that were about all sorts of things. And when he died in the year 1928, Hardy was buried at Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner alongside some of England's greatest writers. Okay, so if you're buried, that means you're put in the ground, assuming that you're already dead. Sometimes, actually, in the past, they accidentally buried people when they were still alive.
That's, yeah.
They thought they were dead or something, but then later they found out that they were buried. And boy, I would hate to have that happen to me. That would be awful. But he was most definitely dead here. He was buried at Westminster Abbey, but he requested that his heart be buried somewhere else. That's interesting. If you request something, you ask someone to do something for you.
Wow, well, it was quite a compliment to be buried in Westminster Abbey. If you ever go to England, guys, and you're in London, that's one of the tourist sites that you can't miss. You want to go to Westminster Abbey. A lot of very, very famous people have been buried there. It's kind of fun to walk around over the tombstones and see who's there. So that was a big honor to be buried there. But he wanted his heart somewhere else. I think this is really romantic. He wanted his heart to be beside the graves of his wife and ancestors. Wife here is his first wife, Emma, that he was still writing these romantic poems to after she had died, and he was already married to another lady, Florence. Poor Florence. It broke her heart when she was seeing these poems. So when you request something, guys, you ask for it. I think request is a more formal word than ask, but you're asking politely or formally for something. Yeah, so it's kind of a romantic ending to his life to have his heart by his first wife, Emma.
Yeah, I guess it's buried in his hometown or something like that. So there you go. There are the life and times of Thomas Hardy, the author of our featured novel, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Did I say that right? Tess D'Urbervilles?
D'Urbervilles. Tess
D'Urbervilles?
of the D'Urbervilles.
Of the D'Urbervilles, right.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of like a French name or something like that.
It is. D'Urbervilles.
But that's the novel he wrote before his last one, Jude the Obscure, and that's when he decided to stop writing novels. He couldn't take the criticism and focused on poetry instead. And as I said before, you can probably find lots of Thomas Hardy's works online for free. But as Stephanie said, what the heck? Go to a bookstore. These books aren't all that expensive.
They're pretty cheap, yeah.
Maybe only you buy Kwai or something like that.
Yeah, they're not very expensive.
You can pick it up. It's always nice having a book. You know, you can smell the paper. You can turn the pages.
You can write notes in the margins. I like that too.
Very good. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our discussion. We're going to hear now from our Chinese teacher.
Hardy 后来在1871年出版了第二本小说 Desperate Remedies。我们接着看第二段的第一句 Although the novel wasn't a massive success, it gave Hardy the confidence he needed to switch careers. 虽然这本小说并没有大获成功，但却给予哈代转职所需的信心。Confidence 是名词信心的意思，形容词是 confident C-O-N-F-I-D-E-N-T Have confidence 或者是 have faith in somebody or something 就是指对什么有信心的意思。例如 People had confidence in the new president's ability to boost the economy 人们对新总统促进经济的能力有信心。文章的最后一段提到 Hardy 因为写了许多不符合当时社会道德价值的小说而备受批评，开始转为写诗。Hardy 过世后被安葬在西敏寺诗人之余，与英格兰一些最伟大的作家同葬。我们看到全文的最后一句 However, he requested that his heart be buried closer to home, beside the graves of his wife and ancestors. 然而，他要求把他的心脏埋葬在他家附近，位在他妻子及祖先的坟墓旁。某些动词例如 request、suggest 建议 S-U-G-G-E-S-T demand 要求 D-E-M-A-N-D insist 坚持 I-N-S-I-S-T command 命令 C-O-M-M-A-N-D 这几个动词后如果接 that 名词子句的话 that 子句里的动词用 should 加原形动词 should 可以省略例如 Susan demanded that her son cleaned up his bedroom before he went out 苏珊要求她的儿子在出门前将他的卧室打扫干净以上就是今天的课程谢谢大家收听
That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, but we're still going to talk some more about Tess of the D'Urbervilles in our next program. We'll talk about some of the ideas in this book, and we might talk about some reasons why you might enjoy reading this book as well. Thank you for joining us. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie. Bye.
Bye.